Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for Shabbos, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in sunny Southern California, joined by my dear teacher and friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Good afternoon, Mark. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good Shabbos, my friend. It's good to be
Good,
back with you.
good Shabbos. Now, you have a reputation
Oh,
in the
God.
community that we all know very well.
And I have nurtured it through
You have your
self-abuse.
reputation is you are an anti-Hanukkite. You
I've
have
been a
deep,
proud anti-Hanukkite
a deep
for 50
antipathy.
years, since I was a rabbi.
Every Jewish child in North America will tell you my favorite holiday is Hanukkah.
Yeah, because you get presents.
You get presents, you eat latkes, you get sufganiyot, jelly donuts, you get to play with the dreidel, you get to light the menorah, the whole family comes together, we decorate the house, we sing the songs.
To which I say, bah, humbug,
The
bah, humbug.
Ebenezer Scrooge of the
And
Jewish
here's
people.
why. Here's why.
Why, Mark?
One,
Why?
number one, the Maccabees ushered in the most corrupt dynasty in the history of Judaism, the
True.
Hasmonean dynasty. The priestly dynasty that followed Judah Maccabee in 167 before the Common Era, when the revolt began, was by far the most corrupt. Alexander Jannaeus, Solomon Alexander, they were awful. They were corrupt. They took bribes. They sold the high priesthood. So that was in fact, they were so bad
How bad
that
were they?
Herod in 37 had to defeat them.
Right.
And they were so bad and they had no support from the people who hated their corruption, that the people turned their support to a group of itinerant teachers who called each other rabbi. And that was the great split into rabbinic Judaism, who also was filled with people who, like me, were anti-Hanukkites.
Mhm.
And the proof is they didn't put the story of Hanukkah in the Tanakh. You can't read the Hebrew Bible and find the story of Hanukkah. It ain't
Nowhere.
there. It's in what we call the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha and fourth Esdras and the Maccabees and in the Mishnah. It's not in there. And why isn't it in there? Because the rabbis hated them. And one of the other evidences of that they hated Hanukkah, the rabbis, was that they picked all of the Haftorahs, as we know, from the time when it was illegal to study Torah. So they picked Haftarot that were similar in theme to the Torah portion. And Miketz, which is always around Shabbos Hanukkah, the Haftorah is Zechariah, Zechariah 7, Lo b'chayil, lo b'choach, ki'im baruchi. You shall not prevail by force or might, but by my spirit alone shall you prevail. And then my friend Debbie Friedman, may her memory be blessed, wrote that wonderful Lo b'chayil, lo b'choach.
Yes.
And so in the Haftorah, they give a little shtuch to the Maccabees. So and then you add the social stuff, which is it's a minor holiday celebrating a bunch of Jewish fascists, and there's not and then it became big only because of Christmas, where Jewish kids felt terrible and Jewish parents felt guilty, so they gave their kids presents on Hanukkah, which was never a part of the tradition of Hanukkah, even in Europe, where they would give a little Hanukkah gelt, and that was it, little money.
Right.
And the third reason, fourth reason, fifth reason I was an anti-Hanukkite is the music and everything else about Christmas. I grew up in Wisconsin with beautiful twinkly Christmas trees and snow and Charlie Brown Christmas. And I went to my neighbor, Doug Albrecht, and I helped him decorate his tree. And the music, the Christmas carols, and all that stuff. And what do we have in competition? to that flood of twinkly brilliance, I had a little dreidel, I made it out of clay. What? What? So, for all those reasons and many more, I was an anti-Hanukkite. Now
Wait. Stop a second. Stop. I just want to reiterate so that everyone gets clear. So, what makes Rabbi Gelman an anti-Hanukkite? Number one, we all know the story of the Maccabees. The Greek Syrians joined with a group of assimilationists in Jerusalem, actually, installed a statue of Zeus in the temple and defiled the temple and tried to convert the Jewish populace away from the faith of Israel to a worship of Greek gods. There was a revolt that started in the small town of Modin, led by a priest named Mattathias and his 5 sons. The most famous one, his name was Judah, who called himself the Maccabee, which means the hammer. And they went and fought against those Greeks, and they came to the temple, and they fought against the Jews who were holding the temple, actually. They won. They cleansed the temple of its idolatry, rededicated it to the God of Israel. That's the holiday. What Rabbi Gelman is pointing out is that what happened next is that the Maccabees didn't leave. The Maccabees stayed put and decided to install themselves as the leaders in Jerusalem. So Simon Maccabee becomes the high priest, and in the next generation, they crowned themselves kings. Now, that he could be the high priest was acceptable because they were a family of priests descended from Aaron. But to be king, that was unacceptable because they were not descendants of King David, and that's what it takes to be king in Jerusalem. More than that, as Rabbi Gelman is pointing out, they were a terribly corrupt and terribly authoritarian government. The only case of forced conversion to Judaism took place under a Maccabee or Hasmonean, that's the name of the family, Hasmonean royalty, a tribe of Idumeans. They lived in north of Israel.
including Herod.
Herod then comes, that's the irony of the story. The guy who will overthrow the Maccabees was made king of the Jews by the Romans because he was converted to Judaism forcefully, or his family was, by the Maccabees. So this corrupt, violent family now runs Jerusalem. They rule Jerusalem for about 100 years. And the story and the history is that what ends up happening 5 generations after Judah Maccabee is that 2 brothers, whose names will give it all away, one is named Aristobulus and one is named Hyrcanus, are fighting against each other to who should be king over Jerusalem. And the populace is so tired of that war that they invite the Romans to come and to rule Jerusalem. They would rather have peace under a Roman government than civil war under a Jewish government. That's the reason why Rabbi Gelman hates the holiday, number one. Number two, he hates the holiday because it really never was a big deal. It became a big deal for 2 reasons. One, you're right. In proximity to Christmas and American life, it became a big deal. It also became a big deal because the Zionists made it a big deal. Because the Zionist revolution was not just to create a Jewish homeland, but to create a new Jew. And the new Jew that the Zionists envisioned would be a Jew who would stand up and fight for his own rights, fight for him or herself. And the last time Jews fought for themselves and won was 166 BCE, the Maccabees revolt. So Hanukkah becomes a symbol for the Zionist revolution of Jewish self-determination and Jewish power. And in America, it becomes a big deal because it's proximate to Christmas. And Rabbi Gelman finds both of those reasons rather weak. And number three, because while our Christian neighbors have such a beautiful, beautiful repertoire of Christian songs, which, by the way, we
Were
wrote
written
most
by
of
Jews.
them. Right.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Right. And silver bells and jingle bells and chestnuts roasting by the open fire, all written by Jews.
All by Jews.
When it comes to Hanukkah songs, all we got is I had a little dreidel. And the last reason, which I want to point out, because I think it's the wisest, the rabbis of the tradition, the rabbis who wrote Judaism, now they're living beginning 100 BCE. So they're living several generations after the Maccabean revolt. They really didn't want to remember the Maccabees. They sort of pushed the holiday aside. And when it became unavoidable to remember it, unavoidable that they had to have something, some vestige of it, what they did was they cleansed it of what the Maccabees were proud of. The Maccabees were proud of their military victory. And the rabbi said, that's not what we're going to remember. They made up the story of the light. Now, I don't think they made it up out of whole cloth. I think they made it up because it was a metaphor for them of their own circumstance. They had fought two revolts against the Romans and lost both of them. And what they wanted to say was, no more are we going to be alive because of our military might. It's going to be instead our affiliation with God, our deep faith. And so they took for the Haftorah of Hanukkah, the Haftorah of Shabbos Hanukkah, the prophecy of a prophet named Zechariah, who said, Lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach, not by might and not by power, but by the Spirit of God will be alive. And the rabbis took that Haftorah and they told the story of the lights that lasted 8 nights, as it were, to try to push aside the military side of the holiday. That's why Rabbi Gelman hates Hanukkah. However, my dear friends, listen up, because the rabbi has come to a new revelation.
I've had my thank you, Jesus moment.
Speak, brother. Not
Amen, amen,
Lahavdil from
hallelujah.
Jesus, but
No, without joking around, because this is a profound transformation in my spiritual life.
please.
Profound. Maybe it's a definite top 5. And this year, if I'm pressed, I'd say it's a top 1. And that's this. When the rabbis took over, and thank you for that summary of what I just said, but it was beautifully done and exactly right. When the rabbis took over and when they owned Judaism, they had to decide how to cope with oppression. I'm talking about murder, rape, violence, pogroms. They had to figure out how to deal with the Inquisition, the Crusades, the Khmelnytsky pogroms of 1668, and the Kishinev pogroms of 1907 or 1903, which was Kishinev? 3, I think.
Three, yeah.
3, yeah. And in all of these medieval and early modern and modern pogroms, the rabbis basically had one response. And that response to evil was to die al kiddush Hashem, to die for the sake of the sanctification of the name of God. Put it in a single word in English, it was martyrdom. That's what the rabbis gave us. If people come to kill you, you should die with virtue and nobility. Because, of course, at that point, they believed in Olam Haba, the world to come. And that's where we will all go. And eventually evil will be punished there. But right now, our only response is to die. So what happened to me after October 7th is something inside me snapped. I think all of us had something inside them snap.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if every one of us is aware of the consequence of the snapping, but I was. I felt after the attack, the pogrom in Gaza on October 7th, I snapped. And I said, we do not need more Jewish martyrs. We need more Jewish Maccabees.
Mm.
There is just the world the way it is requires that we face it with vigilance, power, and exploding pagers. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes.
Right.
If it means bombing Gaza, and we know that civilians are going to get killed in that bombing because Hamas used them as human shields and wouldn't let them flee, we're still going to bomb because we have to defeat them. And the irony of embracing, in my case, re-embracing the Maccabean military approach to Jewish survival was that I could begin to cheer again for Israeli military victories, hard-won, real hard-won military victories, which I could have done in the Yom Kippur War, but I didn't. Because it got all complicated politically at the end. And the Six-Day War, you couldn't mourn for war because it was over in 20 seconds. But this one, where the hostages are still in captivity, where well over 1,000 Israeli soldiers have been killed,
Mm-hmm.
where the entire north of Israel has been depopulated, and which in the middle of it all, Israel has risen from the ashes, destroyed Hezbollah, destroyed Hamas, destroyed the forces in Lebanon, the forces in Iran, Gaza. When, Tom Friedman has written about this. He said, Mark, this is greater than the Six-Day War. This transformation. I remember you and I sitting only months ago, Ed, saying, I think Israel's losing this war.
Yeah.
There were demonstrations, obviously, on campus all over the place where people were demonstrating on behalf of a terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
My grandson in a not Ivy League college is hearing people say, die Zio pigs.
Oof.
And I'm saying, what's going on? We've lost the PR war. We're losing the military war. We can't get the hostages out. We're getting pressured by the government. What's going to happen? And in the middle of this, Israel just flipped the script. And now with the fall of Syria, we're looking at the possibility of a radically transformed Middle East.
Yeah.
All positive. Now, of course, it can turn negative like that, but none of this has to do with what happened to me, why I'm a Hanukkite again. And that is because when we threw out Chayil and Koach as a way of defending ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we basically said we can only defend ourselves because of the good graces of others. And the fundamental Zionist critique of Jewish life is that, no, that doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
We have to defend ourselves based on our own strength and our own sovereignty, and not the goodwill of Lord Balfour.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we now have, I hope, is a generation of Jews who grow up proud that Israel and Israelis will call down fire and brimstone on people who think that they can murder Jews with no consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And I am thrilled by that. I am ennobled by that. I am uplifted by that. And when I look back in Jewish history to an example of where that began, it was the Maccabees and it was Hanukkah. And that's why my tshuva begins not on Yom Kippur, but it began on October 7th.
I have different reasons for loving Hanukkah, but I want to ask you a question about yours, okay? Because I can imagine that a young person listening to your talk would say to you, I respect the idea that Jews need to have power in the world to protect themselves, that Jews have a right to self-defense, and that taking care of terrorist organizations, which are vicious and genocidal, is something we should be grateful for and proud of. The question that the young person is going to ask you, and I'm going to give this young person a lot of credit, is a young person who is a Zionist and really believes that the state of Israel deserves the power of self-defense. The question is, does it trouble you that so many civilians have been killed? Does it trouble you that the Israeli government seems to be holding back on aid, food, other kinds of things going into Gaza? Does the behavior of this government, its conduct of the war, trouble you as at the same time as you're glad that the fight has gone so well?
Okay.
And I'm not making that claim, but I'm asking you the
Okay, I'm
question
glad you're not
in
because
the
I'm
in the
really,
voice of a young
yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'm really angry about the second point. I'll just throw that away,
Okay.
which is that Israel is preventing aid from going into Gaza. That is a canard. That is not true. That's part of a propaganda campaign. What's happening is Israel's letting this aid in and it's being stolen
Stolen.
by Hamas and sold on the black market. So stop with that. That's
Okay.
just not true. The
Okay.
first part is a serious point, and I want to give it the seriousness that it deserves,
Yeah.
even though I don't agree with it. And that is, am I troubled by the amount of civilian casualties?
Hmm.
Yes, I am troubled. I am troubled, but I'm troubled in the same way that I was troubled by the firebombing of Dresden.
Mm.
I'm troubled in exactly the same way that I was troubled by the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I know that the millions of people who died in those bombing runs that had really at that point only one effect, which was to terrorize the Axis power into surrender. What they did is they saved millions, or thousands certainly, of American soldiers' lives that would have been lost in a slow and murderous slog through the
Through the
islands of the South Pacific to Japan. And the firebombing of Dresden reminds us that this is war. This isn't poetry.
Mhm.
And in war, I mean, we have had discussions about the treating of the Amalekites in the Torah. How Saul lost the kingship because he didn't kill them all. He didn't kill the children, for God's sake. So I think what we have to learn about war is that war is hell. And I think we have to remember that this war would not have begun were it not for the fact that Israel was brutally and genocidally attacked by a terrorist organization. We also know that that terrorist organization uses people as human shields. So the reason Israel drops leaflets saying we're going to bomb here tomorrow, and the Hamas tells them, if you leave, we'll shoot your children.
Mhm.
So they're there, they're trapped, they can't leave, they can't stay. And the only way to solve this problem is to defeat the enemy. I
Okay. Now.
remember with great pain,
Mhm.
great pain, Agmas Nefesh, about the letter to McCloy in the War Department during World War II, begging him to bomb the tracks leading to Auschwitz. And he refused, saying the only way to fix this is to defeat Hitler. Now, I didn't agree with that, but I understand it now. I understand that in war, you have major war aims and you can't let anything distract you from it.
Hmm. So one more question, and then I'll give you my Hanukkah story. So one of the consequences of this conflict and what we've gone through this experience this last very painful year is, as you said, Zionism has become an anathema, become a curse word in so many circles, college campuses, certain intellectual circles, in publishing. People saying it's very hard to get a Jewish book published today. In the arts, it's very hard for Jewish artists, especially Jewish artists, talking about Jewish things. It's like this anti-Semitism has risen, and specifically, it's a vicious anti-Zionism that's come about, and it seems so widespread. I mean, just so widespread. The question is, what do you do about that? What do you do
Okay.
about that?
Okay. My answer is people have short memories. And the only way to overcome this is to defeat the enemy. Let me ask you what you imagine will be the response of these newly converted anti-Zionists if there's a Arab Marshall Plan and all the Arab nations combine together to reconstruct Gaza and to have a peace agreement with Israel and to free the Syrian people. I mean, you have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to see the reports coming out of Syria of that torture prison.
Yeah.
And you say, this is who Israel was fighting. This is who they were fighting. These people who are animals, these people who are torturing people in ways that you can't even describe because they're so horrific. They need to be defeated. And once they are defeated, and once there is a new coalition in the Middle East, which I believe, I hope, I can't believe this, but I hope for it. And with the fall of Syria, who knows? I think people will slowly change their mind. And I offer some evidence.
Mhm.
Okay, it's all I have, but I don't need a lot to bring my hope back. I am a naturally hopeful man. There are much fewer demonstrations on campus, if you haven't noticed, on campus right now than there were last year after the attack.
Mhm.
Also, college presidents who were completely corrupt in their treatment of these people, who broke windows,
Yeah.
who terrorized students, Jewish students particularly,
Mhm.
they're now defending lawsuits that they didn't protect their Jewish students. And now, guess what? They're protecting them. So I believe things are changing. What bothers me more than anything, and what produces in me a rage that I really can't find a way to subdue,
Okay.
are Jewish leaders who, at a time when Israel needed support, found every reason to criticize Israel in the middle of the war.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that every criticism they offered was wrong. I'm just saying, come on. Come on. Our brothers and sisters are getting destroyed here. Their children are still held hostage. And you're saying Israel has killed too many civilians and is engaged in blah, 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 blah. I mean, really? Really? Is this the time and the place and the message for a Jewish leader? I don't think so. I think people are beginning, and the Trump victory, I think, is also re-energized those people who say, wait a minute, I'm not on that side. I'm not on the side that's criticizing Israel. I'm on the side that stands with Israel.
Mhm.
In case you haven't noticed, they're the ones who just won a massive victory. Whether you like them or not is not the point. They just won a massive victory in this election. So
Mhm.
when you look at things in California, and I don't mean that that's altered your point of view. I'm just saying I was there for 7 years and my view got altered too. When you're
No.
out there and you're looking around and you say, this is what you're trying to figure out what the world is like, you can't wear California sunglasses. You can't.
Okay.
Because I think the world loves Israel more than we imagine. And when the story of all this is written, there will be a chapter of praise for people that Jewish lefties hated beyond words.
Mm.
And that is Christian fundamentalist Zionists, who in the middle of all this didn't give up on Israel.
Hmm.
Even when Jews gave up on Israel. And I think they deserve more than praise. They
Okay.
deserve our love and our respect.
So I appreciate your spiritual renewal here about Hanukkah. And this conversation's been very valuable, I think, for lots of us. I want to give you slightly different perspective because it's coming to the end of our conversation. Um, I think that you're right about the Hasmonean dynasty becoming corrupt. You're right, of course, about the fact that Jews typically don't um, praise and celebrate military things, except that that was the rabbi's strategy in the face of overwhelming Roman power. They had to find a different way to survive. They knew that if they placed their survival, if they bet their survival on their own material capacity to win wars against the Romans, they were going to lose. So lo b'chaya, lo b'koach, not by power and not by might, became the rabbi's idea of how to survive. And that strategy, by the way, worked. It worked from approximately the year 70 CE, when the temple was destroyed, up until the beginning of the 20th century, when the Zionist movement began. And the Zionist movement said that strategy worked. That strategy worked in Christian Europe and in Islamic Africa. It worked for us at a certain point, but it doesn't work for us anymore. That modernity has demanded that we return to power, which is why the Zionists took up the story of Hanukkah and took up the figure of Judah Maccabee and made a big deal out of Hanukkah again. Okay? I'd like to look at it slightly differently, though. First of all, I agree with you that October 7th has changed Jewish life. And I agree with you that it has brought us back to that Zionist perception that sometimes we have to use power to survive and we shouldn't be embarrassed by it. We have to use it with ethics. We have to use it carefully. We have to be careful about the loss of life because that is our faith. That is the ultimate essence of our tradition. But at the same time, the Talmud is very clear. When someone comes to kill you, get up in the morning and kill him first, you know? And if they'd only done that on October 7th, we'd be having a very different conversation. But the idea of self-defense is built into this tradition. What's also interesting to me, Mark, about Hanukkah is that it was ultimately a culture war. It was a culture war between two very distinct ways of looking at the world and looking at life and looking at religion and looking at divinity. And it was a culture war that began within the Jewish people as well as in the world. The Jewish people find themselves surrounded in a Greek world. And Greek culture, God knows, has an awful lot to be proud of and lovely, right? I love the Olympics, Plato, Socrates, the rationalist bent of Greek philosophy. But there were things about Greek culture and Greek civilization that were deeply difficult for Jews. Part of it was the idolatry. You know, Antiochus didn't just want Jews to worship Zeus, he wanted Jews to worship him. The statue of Zeus that he put in the temple looked a lot like him. And the class differences that go along with Greek philosophy, the idea that slaves are slaves and warriors are warriors and philosophers are philosophers and there's no shifting among them, the loss of a sense of the preciousness of human beings. It was that argument. And when Mattathias decided that there was no other way to win the argument than to go to Jerusalem and destroy the party of assimilation and destroy the idol in the temple and all that it stood for. That cultural conflict, and that cultural conflict suggests itself over and over again in culture. What should be the relationship between a Jewish civilization we live in and the larger civilization we live in? What can we take from the larger civilization that doesn't compromise the essence of the Jewish civilization? And at what point do we need to stand up as a counterculture and say no to the larger civilization? I had a wonderful class with a group of 10th graders at the local high school where I'm helping to teach a little bit. And I asked the kids this question. I said, how many of you have a little brother, a little sister, a little nephew or niece? Everyone's hand goes up. Good. I want you to think of a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old. These kids were 15, 16. I said, what in American life and American civilization do you hope you could protect your little brother or sister from? There's so many things in our civilization that we love, but what would you like to hold back that doesn't get to them because you see what's difficult with them? And the kids had remarkably perceptive answers. Kids said the consumerism. Another kid said the sense that we're always being judged on how we look. That was a young woman. Another kid said social media. I said, really? You guys are online all the time? Yeah, but I don't want my little brother getting that because it's just horrible. Look what it's done to us. The kids were so perceptive, but this idea that sometimes we have to stand against the culture and say no, right? And the fact that the Maccabees were successful, had the Maccabees not been successful in that culture war, had Judaism gone the way of every other ancient culture that was confronted by Hellenism, by Greek culture, then the Bible would have disappeared from Western civilization. Then there would have been no Christianity and no Islam, and the world would be, needless to say, a little different than it is today. The fact that a small, tiny group of crazy people, and God knows they were crazies, were able to hold out and hold the faith and rebuild the faith, rededicate the people to the faith. That to me is a sort of interesting miracle of history. And that's what I like to celebrate.
That's wonderful. I want to correct something since I'm a Greek lover, and I hate to see Greeks cartooned the way you did.
No,
The
I'm
truth
just
of the
trying to,
matter is that they didn't worship Zeus.
yeah.
Okay? They didn't worship Zeus any more than Americans worship Paul Bunyan. These were folk tales of the people and the gods of Olympus that were part of a national folk system. Plato, Aristotle, Aristophanes, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, all these guys I read, the pre-Socratics, they worshipped thought. Aristotle's god was not Zeus. He called it noesis noiosis in Greek, which means thought thinking itself.
Yeah.
These were the foundation people of all philosophy. Aristotle created biology, ethics, metaphysics, epistemology. And
Well,
let's not forget that the reason Judaism survived was not because of the Maccabees, but because the rabbis studied with the Greeks that the Maccabees were killing. And the rabbis said, oh, they teach about matter and form. Well, we're going to turn that into body and soul, guf and neshama. And we're going to say that there is a place when your body dies, your neshama goes to the olam haba, the world to come. And that world, which Christians called heaven, that world is the answer to why righteous people suffer on earth. Mm-hmm. That solution, olam haba, heaven, created the answer of Judaism that preserved it and the contribution of Christianity that made it unique.
Right. I'm not suggesting, first of all, I don't know if Aristotle and Plato were exactly average Greeks, but let's not debate that.
They weren't average anything. They were the most intelligent.
It wasn't just a religious thing, it was a political thing. To bring a statue of the king into the temple means you elevate the king above normal human beings, and you create this political cult. And that was the problem that the
Yeah, but then
Maccabees.
they declared themselves to be kings.
No, but they didn't make them gods. That's the point. They didn't make kings into gods. That's what the Greeks did. Look, that's what
They
Augustus
did
Caesar did.
create them. They
Augustus
weren't
Caesar
God.
did it.
They weren't
Augustus
God.
Caesar did that. Right. All right. Look, what I'm suggesting is that the ability of the tradition, of Jewish history, to sort out its relationship with the outside culture, to take what enriched the outside culture. You're absolutely right that they took the best of Greek culture and brought it inside, and to reject the stuff that would poison Jewish culture. That move is exactly what the Maccabees did. And that's what you're celebrating on Hanukkah. What you're
That's
celebrating is
exactly what they didn't do. That's the
no,
problem. The rabbis did that. The
right. That's what
Maccabees
I'm
didn't.
saying. We're celebrating the rabbi's holiday. That's what
Right.
the lights are. That's what the holiday. That's what we're celebrating. They gave us the story of the lights, which is to say that in a dark world, it just takes a little faith, a little light, to dispel the darkness and light up the world. And that's what the rabbis saw their role as doing.
And there is really two kinds of Jews, and it's still till today. There are Jews who believe there's nothing that I hate to use the word goyim. I hate that word, but nothing that non-Jews have to teach us. That's one group. Ultra-Orthodox fundamentalists. And then there's people who believe that there isn't a single version of Judaism that has ever emerged on planet Earth that did not take seriously what the rest of the world was learning about the
Absolutely.
Jews.
And that's the
That
talent.
second group was the rabbis, it
Right.
was Maimonides, the Neoplatonized Aristotelian. It was eventually for the new liberal Judaisms in Germany. It was Kant, Hegel, Fichte, Schleiermacher.
Right.
And
But the question is, every other ancient tribe assimilated into the Hellenistic world. We didn't. How come? How come? And not just not just the world of the Greeks. Later it'll be the world of the Romans, and it'll be the world of the Byzantines, and the world of the Persians. And we have this incredible talent, exactly what you said, to take the best of the cultures in which we live, but maintain a sense of our own integrity. That's the genius. And where do you draw that line? Right? Why aren't Christmas trees Jewish? Because that's where we drew the line, right? That's where we drew the line. So it's remarkable that we have this capacity to live in a majority civilization, adopt the best of it, let go of the worst of it, or at least the parts that will poison us, and maintain our own cultural integrity. That's
I,
what I celebrate on Hanukkah,
well,
Gelman.
that's good. And that world that you celebrate is beautiful. Its relationship to the actual world is somewhat tenuous,
Oh,
however.
to the actual
Irving
story that,
Berlin, Irving Berlin had the biggest Christmas tree in Manhattan.
right,
Let's not forget this. And let's
right.
not forget the fact that Karl Marx's father converted to Christianity so he could be an attorney. That let's not forget the fact that the Jews,
Right.
Muslim Spain, of Salman ibn Gabirol, they were happy to be instilled in
The world of
and
Arabic philosophy and
called as the finance ministers of Ferdinand and Isabel. They later
Abarbanel.
and so and the physician to Saladin in the case of
Maimonides. Right.
So there was a big assimilationist move in Judaism, and one can make the case that today the very small number of people who are becoming rabbis, a topic we need to return to at some point in the near future,
Fair enough.
the very difficult future that synagogues face, the small turnouts that we face in the pews, that all of this is an example of precisely Judaism not preserving what keeps us together and accepting far too much of the culture that is destructive to our spiritual essence.
That's a very, very important point and a very, very important question. And so I want to stop there. Okay. I want to
Yeah.
wish everybody a really happy Hanukkah, certainly a lovely Shabbos, but a happy Hanukkah
Yeah.
with latkes and sufganiyot. And if you need a topic of serious conversation for your table, the one that the rabbi just asked, maybe the one that I asked by 10th graders, which I still think is powerful. If you could protect your children from any aspect of American culture, what would you want to protect them from? Because that highlights the extent to which we are still a counter culture, somewhat opposed to the culture outside. And the question is, have we assimilated things which are not very good for us? And then at what point do you step away from those things and say, here's where I have to assert my difference, my distinction? Big questions, great questions for latkes, great questions for sufganiyot. Mark, good Shabbos and a happy Hanukkah. Welcome
Hey,
home.
I'm with you. Happy
Welcome home to
Hanukkah.
Hanukkah. Thank you for
Allah
joining us.
Nisim, Al Hapurkan.
Amen.
Amen.